Sir Walter Scott went over the Causey Mounth when he visited Aberdeen in September 1796. Much taken with the windswept moor of Drumforsky on the outskirts of the city, he incorporated it as the moor of Drumthwacket in his historical novel A Legend of Montrose. This was a tale set during the Earl of Montrose's 1644–45 military campaign in Scotland on behalf of King Charles I against the Covenanters who had sided with the English Parliament in the Civil War. This tour of the Causey Mounth takes place to celebrate Sir Walter Scott, the father of historical novels and maybe Scottish tourism's 250th anniversary. For many hundreds of years, the Causey Mounth was the only route north to Aberdeen, with firm records dating back to the 12th century. The Causey crossed 11 miles of heath and bog and gets its name from the fact that causeways of rocks and cobbles had to be built to cross the worst of these bogs. Much of its historical record talks of the difficulties in maintaining the route, but despite this, it lasted for many hundreds of years and only began to lose out with the coming of coach travel and the new turnpike road built in the late 18th century. The Causey Mounth was also known as the Cowie Mount, and this is where we start our tour of this most easterly of the mount roads over the Grampians. Little remains of the southern end of the Causey Mounth, the royal borough of Cowie and its stronghold castle. A search through the long grass reveals the remains of Cowie Castle on its promontory overlooking Kirkshore. This line of stones are the last representatives of the medieval royal borough of Cowie, once stretching from Kenneth to Aberdeen and as far over as Durras and Banchory. This was the land of the Fraser family, who fought for Robert the Bruce at Bannockburn and other great battles, and also held the office of Lord Chamberlain of Scotland from 1325 to 1329. Continuing on our path, and close by, we find another more substantial ruin. This is Cowie Chapel. It is on the site of a chapel established by the 7th century Scottish Saint Nachlan. According to a legend, Nachlan owned a great treasure, and when he died, the treasure was wrapped in a bull's hide and tied with a rope so you could hang yourself, and buried between the kirkyard and the burn. According to the old rhyme, between the kirk and the kirk's ford, there lies St. Nachlan's hoard. In 1276, the chapel was rebuilt and dedicated to the Virgin Mary. The chapel existed as a church for 3 centuries more and gained vast income from the surrounding rich farmland. It benefited from royal patronage, with generous offerings from King James IV on his many visits, as well as gifts of land. This did not last, however, and soon after the Reformation in the 1560s, it was unroofed by ecclesiastical authority on account of certain scandals. These scandals were not recorded. It quickly became dilapidated, used as a source of stone for local building work, even though there was a threat of the stones raining blood if ever they were taken from the kirk. The dramatic ruin of the east gable end is original 13th century and has 3 early English lancet windows. Compare this with the later extension and its square window. The kirkyard contains many 19th century gravestones, recording lives and deaths at sea of local people. Carved before power tools, they were made of a softer stone which allowed for an intricate carving. These days, lichens are taking over many of these old stones. At the west end, there's a semicircular mort house. Built in 1842, this is where bodies were kept safe from the body snatchers. Originally it had a red tile roof and steps down into it, but is now turfed over and has no access. Beside the mort house, there is a granite replica of a memorial stone, a memorial to 4 members of the Stonehaven crew of the St. George lifeboat, drowned after attempting a rescue in 1874. They had tried in vain to row out and overtake the stricken Grace Darling, and having travelled so far north, opted to try and get back into Aberdeen harbour, but capsized while trying to reach there. The Causey Mounth can only be found here and there in the southern end, running behind Cowie House and as farm tracks and old field boundaries. It went over Megry Hill and down to Muckles. So for now we will leave this old royal borough of Cowie to the wildflowers and seabirds that have made it their home. You can trace the Causey as it comes down from Muckles Castle, and here we can join the old road at St Turnham's Episcopal Church. Built in 1831, it is the oldest church building in the Diocese of Brechin. Driven from their parish church of Fetteresso in 1705, the Episcopalians established meeting houses in the grounds of Muckles Castle before raising the funds to build the present-day church. You get a feel for the old road as you ford the Fifi Burn, or cross on the wooden plank bridge if you'd rather, and up to Nether Cairnhill, where we are back in the modern world with the new town of Chapelton growing to the west of the old road. From the crest of a hill at Windy Edge, we leave the new town of Chapelton behind us. Sheltered from the noise of modern-day traffic, it begins to feel like we are going back in time on the old road. The sound of bumblebees in the wildflowers, scolding from the whitethroats, and the yellowhammer, little bit of bread and no cheese call from vantage points. From here we get a view across the fields to the designed landscape of Elsick House. And did these escapee apple trees by the Elsick Burn grow from an earlier traveller's meal? Crossing the sturdy bridge over the Elsick Burn, we arrive at Geely Brand's historic coaching inn. Geely Brand's Inn turned farm turned small business units, operated as a coaching inn from as early as the 12th century, so dating back nearly as far as this Causey Mounth route. Beyond, we join a tarmac road, access to Geely Brand's and modern houses around the grand driveway entrance to Elsick House. Owned since 1367 by the Bannerman family, the house and estate is now owned by the Duke of Fife, great-grandson of Ethel Bannerman. For a shorter, gentle walk through time, the Chapelton Trail continues here, through part of the landscape grounds of Elsick House and back to Chapelton. Beyond we cross the Camuth Moor Road, where there stands a former United Free Kirk, and the road leads west to the old chapel and graveyard of Elsick. Continuing on our tarmacked way, we find more evidence of designed landscapes, and hidden within woodland, the red house of Berry Hill. Not particularly visible today, to the east, in farmland, there is a standing stone close to the farm buildings. Beyond Berry Hill, we lose the tarmac and we follow the old Causey through the undergrowth out to the modern road to Portlethen. This can be a busy road, and care needs to be taken as we turn east for a short stretch to the entrance to Old Bourtree Bush. Bourtree, of course, means elder, so this is Old Elder Bush. Along this driveway, we can see an old track heading west through woodland and farmland of the Quarthies. The Causey Mounth used to pass through the buildings of Old Bourtree Bush, but today the house has been modernised and we take a path bypassing to the west. Here we are entering an older Neolithic and Bronze Age land with a stone circle visible on higher ground. Old Bourtree Bush Stone Circle. Originally, many more stones made up this circle, encompassing a cairn, possibly a ring cairn. The height of the upright suggests that the circle was graded, with tallest stones in the southwest grading down to lower stones in the east-northeast. Just beyond, another stone circle is glimpsed on the horizon. One of the best preserved recumbent stone circles and ring cairns. This is a Quarthies, originally comprising at least 18 stones 25 metres north to south, encircling a large ring cairn and inner curb. The ring cairn carves out to join the recumbent, lying on the south-southeast and well within the circle. The recumbent and its only remaining west flanker are of coarse grained grey granite with quartz seams, while many of the other stones are red granite. Peculiar to the northeast of Scotland, Bronze Age recumbent stone circles consist of a large stone lying on its side. The recumbent with upright flankers either side within the stone circle. Often remains of urns and burials have been found within these inner cairns. Back on the original route of the Causey and on the lower land, this is where a stretch of causeys would have been built up to cross the boggy land of Portlethen Moss. In those days much more extensive than it is now on the edge of Portlethen. Crossing the Cairnville Minor Road, the Causey is lost to the Portlethen Golf Course. A dry stone dyke marks the route, which you can still follow if you beware of incoming golf balls. It reappears as a rough route beside the golf course, coming out at Badentoy Industrial Estate, passing another totally rebuilt and enclosed stone circle near Craighead. Here at School Hill, we are again in the modern world, with rapidly advancing hillside developments. This stretch of the Causey Mounth used to be a rat run from Bankery Devenick, but recently closed off with the creation of the AWPR. It can again be a pleasant walk. Passing the new hillside school, we head out along another straight through low farmland. We pass the buildings of Causey Port, where the Causeys would have crossed a large expanse of moss. And here stood a gate, set up to collect tolls to pay for the upkeep of the Causeys on this mount route. A horseman paid the same as 10 sheep at 2 pennies, while a cow or an ox paid double, and a cartload even more at 2 Scots shillings. This was one of the first forms of tolls in the area. As we approach Bankery Devenick, we find another recent change, and we are diverted over a footbridge across the AWPR. Looking west, we can see the small remnant of Drumforsky Moor, now called Hare Moss. The basis for Walter Scott's Moor of Drumthwacket, the land of Captain Dalgetty, the soldier of fortune, in his tale of the English Civil War, A Legend of Montrose, published in 1819. A small mosaic of wet woodland and modified bog, Hare Moss is a minute remnant of the huge expanse of bog and moor that existed before industrial-scale drainage in the 19th century. Bogs have always had a hard time of it through history, and Hare Moss, known as Moor of Drumforsky at the time, was no exception, described as a most unsightly object to travellers. Drained, tamed and cultivated, we have now come to appreciate the value of our raised bogs as carbon sinks and as flood defence, but most of all as fabulous wetland habitats for wildlife, orchids, sundews, bog cottons, frogs, newts, dragon and damselflies. But they certainly were a challenge for travellers, even with the construction of the stone causeways, the Causeys. In 1658, Captain Franks of the Parliamentary Army wrote in his Northern Memoirs, "Causeys uncartable, encumbered with bogs that would bury a horse." Hare Moss was given high value in the environmental assessment for the AWPR. And only time will tell if the incision of the new road will affect Hare Moss and its connectivity to the surrounding habitats. And will the wildlife learn to use the culverts for the burns and ditches? Beside the old Causey and bordering onto Hare Moss, a new habitat has been created, a network of accommodation ponds created to ensure water can drain off the new road. When I was there, it was visited by feeding swallows and blue damselflies, with the surrounding species-rich grassland attracting ringlet and meadow brown butterflies. Continuing on our way, we cross the junction and pass the wooded Cran Hill. On a tarmac road now, we are on the in-use section of the road, down through Bankrydevnik and on to Aberdeen. Catching our first sight of Aberdeen, we are now over the rise and the Causey passes Bankrydevnik schoolhouse and school. Beyond, looking over the fields of crops, it is a far cry from the barren land destitute of trees, often described in the 18th century. Although still in use, it no longer connects to the A92 and South Aberdeen at the junction we just passed, making this a pleasant walk appreciated by walkers and cyclists. With wildflowers on the roadside verges and views down across to Kincardine, we make our way to Tollo Hill, old policy grounds of Bankery Legart Estate, an attractive mixed woodland with many trails and old granite quarries. Here we leave the Causey Mounth as we look down to the Brigadier. Maybe we are standing where James Graham, the Earl of Montrose, gathered his troops. His Covenanter army descended to overrun the royalist forces of Lord Aboyne at the Brigadier in 1639. The Earl of Montrose later changed sides and again took Aberdeen in 1644, defeating the Covenanters of the city who had sided with the English Parliament against Charles I. This time it was a bloody affair, and the 3-day sacking of Aberdeen won the Earl little local support for the rest of his royalist campaign. The Causey Mounth route continues crossing the Dee at Brigadier, up the Hardgate, entering the city through the Green.